Good morning, and today we're going to look a little bit at the author John Steinbeck and the Grapes of Wrath. First, our author, John Ernst Steinbeck. He was born in Salinas, California on February 27, 1902. Now, his parents encouraged his love of writing from a very early age. Being out in California, he also learned about ranch life as a teen during the summers in which he would work. Now, Steinbeck graduated from Salinas High School in 1919 and attended Stanford University. But he had a poor attendance in a lot of his classes because Steinbeck would only attend the classes that interested him, such as writing, literature, and marine biology. He leaves Stanford in 1925 and shortly after decides to become a writer full-time. Now, his first novel, Cup of Gold, was published in 1929. And because it was successful enough, he did then marry his first wife, Carol Henning, in 1930. Now, Carol was instrumental in writing Steinbeck's most famous novels. They moved near Monterey, California, to a small town called Pacific Grove. Now, Tortilla Flat, written in 1935, received the California Commonwealth Club's Gold Medal for Best Novel by a California Author. Shortly after that, we see In Dubious Battle, and then in 1937, Of Mice and Men is published. In 1939, The Grapes of Wrath would be published, and now we have Steinbeck as an established author. At this point in time, World War II was beginning, so he becomes a war correspondent during the war, and the articles that he writes, he collects into another nonfiction novel called Once There Was a War. He also writes The Moon is Down, which is counted as a bit of propaganda for the Allied forces. Now, at this time, he also was far away from home, and so therefore he and Carol break up, and he decides to marry Gwen Conger in 1943. With Gwen, he has 2 children, Thomas and John Jr., but they divorce shortly after that in 1948. In 1950, John Steinbeck marries Elaine Scott, and they are married through his death on December 20th, 1968. Now, his story, The Grapes of Wrath, was written between February and October of 1938. He begins calling it L'Affaire de Lettisburg because it was an attempt at satire. It was terrible, and Steinbeck decided to destroy the manuscript and start all over again. Next, he starts writing them as short story articles for the San Francisco News and starts titling it The Harvest Gypsies. Eventually, it's published as a book, and this is an excellent introduction to The Grapes of Wrath. Now, The Grapes of Wrath was an instant bestseller. It wins the Pulitzer Prize in 1939. Shortly after that, they asked John Steinbeck to write the screenplay, and so it is made into a feature film in Hollywood in 1940. Now, John Steinbeck himself would win the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1962. But at the same time, it was also banned in places like Kern County, California. California did not want to think that the way that California was portrayed in The Grapes of Wrath was what it was actually in reality. They thought that they were portrayed unfairly. Steinbeck also has some controversy with The Grapes of Wrath because he's accused of being a communist. There's this ideal of working together in order to improve the lives of themselves instead of just letting the ranchers do whatever they want to the ranch hands. So Steinbeck was accused of being a communist. Now, with The Grapes of Wrath, there are several influences that kind of come into writing this story. Most of where the story comes from, he learned from Tom Collins. Now, Tom Collins is a manager of Arvin, who's a federal migrant labor camp. Now, he shared his reports that he wrote down with Steinbeck, and Steinbeck would visit him, and he would also visit the federal migrant labor camp in order to take down a lot of notes. He also has influences from Ed Ricketts, who is a friend and a marine biologist. And he's also influenced by Carrie McWilliams' story, Factories in the Field. Finally, he was also influenced by Dorothea Lange and a lot of her famous photographs of the migrant workers. And he corresponded with her about the photographs, and then she actually corresponded back. Now, at the time this was being written, it was in the height of the Great Depression in the United States, but the farmers were struggling before the stock market crash of 1929. The Dust Bowl had come in before this point in time, and already they were just eking out a living for themselves. At this point in time, most of the poorer farmers had poor farming methods. They were using farming methods that had been used for centuries instead of using the newer and latest machines. They were also using overworked land. They were on their family's land that they had had for generations, and therefore what they wanted to grow wasn't quite working anymore. And so when the Great Depression comes along, the farmers go bankrupt. They had too many loans into the banks, and the banks had to call their loans. At the same time, a lot of the crops would fail because of the droughts and the eventual Dust Bowl, which was a severe drought. The topsoil would literally blow away. We talk about Black Friday when it comes to the stock market crash of 1929. They actually had a Black Tuesday in which literally topsoil gets blown away. You can see one of the dust storms from Boise City, Oklahoma. Now, the Dust Bowl is actually a man-made environmental catastrophe. We did take away a lot of the things that would help to keep the soil, and so the soil was going to erode away. Now, it is estimated that millions of people lost their land. They became migrants and had to move elsewhere for work. Most of these people headed west. They didn't want to go east because they weren't used to city life. They didn't know how to work in the cities, so most headed west in search of new farmland. Now, in John Steinbeck's story, The Grapes of Wrath, you're going to meet the Joad family. Now, Tom Joad is the oldest son who's just been released from prison and makes it back to the Joad family farm just in time to help his family move west. Ma Jo is the matriarch. She's the citadel of the family. If there's going to be anybody who can move this family out west, anybody with the strength and tenacity, it's going to be Ma Joad. Pa Joad is technically the leader of the family. He's the father. He's the sharecropper. He's the one looking for land to settle on. We also have Rosa Sharn, which is the daughter. She is married to Connie, and she is currently pregnant, so they are also looking for their new way of life. We have Al Joad, who is Tom's younger brother. He's a teenager, and he's responsible for the family truck. He's the one that is interested in the newer machines. And coming along with the Joad family is going to be Jim Casey. He's a former preacher, and he joins the family as they head west in search of new life. So as you begin taking a look at the Grapes of Wrath, you're going to notice the Joad family are heading to California in the first third or so of the book. Because they're sharecroppers, they lost their land, they're going to drive on Highway 66 to California. And you're going to see them stopping several times in roadside camps. Now, the next part that they have in the Grapes of Wrath, they've actually made it to California, and so they get into a Hooverville, or a squatter's camp. Eventually, they're moved into Arvin, which in the book is called Weed Patch. That's a federal migrant labor camp. And then you'll also see them move into Hooper Ranch, which is a corporate-owned camp that sends people off to work on ranches. The last part of the book might be considered part of the novel that we would call The Dream, in which you would finally find work in California. A bunch of the people are going to pool their money together, and then they are going to buy land and return to farming their own land. Lastly, as you look for major themes in The Grapes of Wrath, you're going to notice a lot of moving from I to we. Again, this is the controversial ideal that people thought that John Steinbeck was pressing for communism, where everybody pools their money together and everybody buys a piece of land so everybody can work on it. You see this moving from what can I do to improve myself, to what can we do to improve our lives together. There is the abuse of power. Again, the controversy as to why a lot of places in California did not want the Grapes of Wrath published and shown. This abuse of power comes from people who want to have cheap, easy labor. And so a lot of the ranches were shown to be quite cruel. Another major theme would be the family, as we see Tom Joad coming back from prison to help his family move west and to start life again. You see how closely knit the family is. There's also this sense of movement where we have the American movement of migrants still looking for that American dream, that success, that better way of life, which means you have to move. And generally in America, it is moving west. You see the idea of industrial versus agrarian farming, where we have farmers from Oklahoma and the Midwest who've been doing the agrarian farming, the old way of farming, for generations, and they have to start getting used to the machine, as John Steinbeck calls it, where we're using tractors, where we're using trucks in order to move things. And lastly, a theme would be the sense of dignity, where we don't have this sense of classes. You actually want to see humans for who they are, the hardworking, good-souled people that every human being should be treated as. Thank you so much for stopping by for this introduction to The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. If you'd like me to go chapter by chapter through John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, or you'd like to learn more about John Steinbeck's novels, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what else you'd like to learn. And as always, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed.